Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and in this video, which might be a longer one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build from scratch a website that uses a third-party API and just build like a full-on sort of something okay, quick project. Um, Bottom line, so basically what we'll do is first we're going to pick an API and test an API, so that way we can see, hey, what API do I want to use? After we do that, we'll um, basically build out the site and deploy the basic shell of the site so that way it's deployed. And then we'll build the thing and then we'll style it. Okay, so first, now again, I also recommend that if you don't already follow me on dev.to, so dev.to, a great place for developers to write blogs, make sure you follow me on dev.to. Okay, I always enjoy getting more follows so you can see all my latest blogs and things like that. Also, make sure to head over to docs.devnursery.com for a lot more reference material that you can find on videos, written stuff, everything you need to like learn about all of the things. But let's take a look at the third-party API. So let's see here, free REST APIs, 3 public REST APIs. Okay, so that's going to be our first job. We need just to find an API to pull data from, and then we'll come up with sort of what the app idea is. So let's see here, public APIs, README. Let's see what this is. Scale your with README enterprise and easy to maintain hub for all your APIs. No, that sounds like it's gonna be more setup work. I want to look for something really simple and free. Public APIs here from GitHub's a list. Okay, when was this last list? List was last updated September 20th. Okay, so not too long ago. Let's look at these categories and let's go with finance. Okay, insider trading data, validate VAT numbers, real-time and historical market data on all U.S. equities and ETFs. Okay, so again, now when I look at this list, I'm thinking, okay, hey, this is what I need for authentication. So if I need an API, like if I see OAuth, I'm immediately going to eliminate that from the list just because OAuth requires a decent amount of extra steps to kind of get connected. If you're a newer developer, probably not going to be the easiest thing. The easiest things would be no auth, where you just basically make a request. API key, usually you either have to put an API key in the header or in the URL. Generally, read the documentation, it'll tell you where to put the API key. So maybe an API key is fine, but let's see what we have. You fed treasury. Ooh, okay, let's take a look at that. Okay, what is an API? Yep. Okay, so API endpoint URL structure. So bottom line is, first thing you do, you find the API, you find what is the documentation. Documentation is always going to explain to you like how do you create a URL to request something. So in this case, like base URL example, API fiscal data, services, fiscal service. So that's the base URL. So the URL is always going to start with this. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I want to test this out. So I'm going to create like a little scratch.html. Because the first thing I want to do is I want to actually practice it on an HTML page, because that's going to allow me to catch if there's something called a CORS problem. CORS just means like their API isn't allowed to be requested from another website. Like you may be able to make requests and get data for you personally, okay, using some other mechanism. But the question is, can I actually build a website with this data? Like, can I request it and my website successfully request the data? I need to test that out. So I'm going to just create a little HTML page here. All I really care about here is some JavaScript on the page. Okay. And cool. And then I'm going to just create a variable with the base URL, const the base URL equals let me actually copy that. Good. And const endpoint. Endpoint's the part of the URL that comes out after the base URL. So endpoint equals, and then we'll figure out what endpoint we want. So let's see here. That's just one example. How to access our API. Endpoints, list of endpoints. Let's go to that. How to access our API. Actually, let's go through here. Meaning it does not require user account registration token to begin using a JSON formatted ACS value. You can also blah blah blah. Example response. Good. Endpoints. 120-day delinquent debt road referral. Let's see if there's find one that's kind of interesting. Average interest rates on U.S. Treasury secretaries. Ooh, I like that. Okay, so we're going to look that up. That's going to be the endpoint we use. Okay, list of endpoints. Okay, average interest rates on U.S. Treasury secretaries. So I am going to grab that endpoint here. That's the endpoint of the URL. So essentially, the URL is these things put together. Okay, so I'm going to say const URL equals base URL plus the endpoint. Okay, just so that we have it all kind of in one line. Okay, cool. Now let's just test it out. So let's see here. If I do a fetch, and I'm going to fetch the URL. Okay, dot then. And again, that's going to then we get the response. And then I'm going to want to convert that response should be JSON. So I should be able to convert that to JavaScript object. So res. So I'm going to return res.json. And then we do a dot then res.json, not res.json. This case should be data. And then what I want to do is console.log that data. Because I want to see if we actually got the data. So actually, let me go back over there and then open this up in live server. And then let me open up DevTools to see if I got that console log. Failed to load resources. Okay, let me just refresh this. Yep, there it is. Okay, so it did load the data. So let's see what data we got. So there's the data. There's indict. Okay, and basically we see security type, targetable treasury bonds, interest rate, treasury inflation index notes, totally marketable securities. Okay. Interesting. Cool. Okay. So. Okay. Got it. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a website where you can look up current interest rates. So in this case, I don't really need to be doing this API call every time because all the data I need is kind of going to be in that initial call. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call when make that request when the website is first opened, and then save that in a variable, and then I'll have like a button where you can use to refresh it. So if you want to refresh the data, it'll make the API call and update the data kind of thing. Okay. So let's see here. So we know the this API works. That's going to work for me. So now I can actually start building the page. So new terminal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a few files. Touch index.html, app.js, and style.css. I'll start setting up my boilerplate. So go to my index.html, set up my boilerplate HTML. Again, current rates, we'll call it. And basically what's going to happen here, we're going to have a header that's going to basically say H1 current interest rates. And then we're going to have a nav, which is actually where we're going to put all our links to like which rate do you want. And then here in the main is where we'll actually display the rate that you want. And then I'll have a footer here, which will later on put our refresh button. Okay, cool. So right now I'm going to close the scratch.html, get that out of the way. Move this kind of over here. Okay, so let's see here. I'm going to open this up in there. So open up with live server. So there's our page at the moment. Okay, awesome. And then I'm going to connect the JavaScript file. So let's do that. So let's say script.source, and that's going to be ./app.js. And then we're going to add the defer keyword so that way the JavaScript doesn't run until after the DOM is loaded. I'm going to connect the CSS. So that'd be link, connect that CSS file, /style.css. Okay, cool. So that should be all connected. I'll confirm that it's connected by going to my inspect, going to the going to my sources section and just double checking, hey, yep, all connected, good. Okay, and now the first thing I want to do is actually just get the data. So basically, starting with my JavaScript, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an object that's just going to be called app state. And essentially, this is all the data that the app's going to be using for different purposes. Okay, and one of the properties I'm going to have in there is going to be sort of the data. Okay, which will start out as an empty object. Okay, and then we're going to write a function that gets the data. So gets data, or we'll call it get rates. Okay. And what this function will do, I'm going to just copy over from the other page my variables here. And also have those variables declared up here. Okay. And then this is going to be the function to get up-to-date rates. Okay. So basically what I'll do is I'll first fetch based on the URL. Then we do .then res, and we return res.json to get the data. And then we get the data. And basically what I'd like to do is take app state, take the app state .data, and I want to change it to be worth data. Okay, so basically I'm swapping out the data that's in there. Cool. So that function's always gonna right now get the rates. Now eventually I also wanted to update what's going on in the DOM, but I don't want to put all that logic in the get rates function. So I'm gonna kind of put the pieces of that logic in separate functions and then call them in there, just so that way it's more organized. So this is gonna be a function to build the nav. Okay, so assuming that we have that data in there. So again, I'm going to actually console log that data. Console.log data. Okay, because this function, I'm going to put all the way at the bottom. Initial call. Fetch of rates. And basically what I'm going to do here is just call get rates, because I want that console log. Because I want to look at the data. Okay? Because I'm going to have to work with the data. And actually, like, now you notice that the array of data is not even, I don't want this object. I just really want that data array. So really, I want this to be data.data. Because technically, data is a property of that object. So I want app-state.data to equal the data property in that object. So, and that object currently is being stored in data, because that's the response from the API call. Okay, cool. So console.log, great. So I'm going to write a function that is going to build the nav. So function, call it render nav. Okay. And what that's going to do is I want to build a list of all the different possible rates. So as you see here, if I look at this array, in each object, there's a property called security description. I just basically want an array of that property. Like I would just like a list of those strings. And that's it. Gesundheit? Not Gesundheit, just have a cough. Okay. So I'm going to use the map function. I'm going to map over this array and just say, hey, give me back an array of just the descriptions. Okay, so we're going to say const descriptions. I spelled that wrong. Descriptions equals, and we're going to say app state dot data, because that should be the array, dot map. So I'm going to map over it. And for each rate, what I want to return is just the rate dot put that there for a second. Let's just take a look at the data. It's going to be rate dot security description. So dot security description. Okay, now just to confirm that that did what I think it's going to do, let's console.log descriptions. There should be an array of strings if that did what I think it's going to do. Okay, but which we don't know because it's not calling that function yet. So really, I want to make sure I call this function now over here. Okay, and that works. See, there's the array of all the strings, and that's kind of what I wanted. Good. And then essentially what I wanted to do is build a navigation with all those names. Okay, although that's 100 names, do I really want to build a navigation with 100? Sure, why not? Okay. So then what I'm going to want to do is loop through those descriptions. So we'll say for description, for let description of descriptions. So for each description, what I want to do is I want to create a div. Okay, so I want to const div equals document dot create element, and I'm going to create a div. And then the div, I want to have the inner text div.innerText equals the description. I also wanted to have an ID of the description. So div dot set attribute. I want to set the ID attribute, and I want to set it to the description, so that way it has an ID that matches. And then I want to add a class. Div. Actually, do I need to add a class? No, I don't think we need to add a class. Okay, cool. And I want to then attach that, so I'm going to say document dot query selector. I'm going to collect the nav element, and then I want to take that and I want to append to it the div. Okay, and there we go. So I've now created, there's like my menu, my navigation. None of them are like clickable per se. We'll take care of that in a moment. But let's actually style that while we're at it, since we're at this point, because right now it's going to just take up too much space like that. So I want the nav to be a flex box. So display flex. Okay, good. So now we're listing all the names there. I want the flex wrap to be wrap. Okay. I want the font size in here. 0.5 EMs, like half the current font size. Maybe not, a little bit bigger. 0.75. Okay. And then each of these divs inside the nav, I want them to have a border of, we'll say, gray. Make it 3 pixels. 3 pixels solid gray. See, they're all kind of tightly kind of touching each other, so I don't want that. So I'm going to want to give it some margin. So we'll say 2 pixels of margin, just to kind of give it a little bit more space. They're a little stuck in that box, so I'm going to give it like a 1 pixel padding. Okay, and that's kind of, you know, it's, again, it's a lot of options, so probably still not quite. Ideally I'd make it less, but we'll get there. Maybe what I'll do is I'll make the nav, we'll give it a height of 200 pixels. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to change its overflow to scroll. Okay, so that way anything above the 200, that you can scroll through. Okay. Not ideal, not pretty, but it'll work for the moment. Because again, I'm just making this up on the spot. Okay, and then basically we want to use justify content to make those boxes just align a little bit better. So we'll just say space between. Okay, and how about if I do space around? Let's see, does that look better? Yeah, space between probably looks a little bit better. Okay, cool. And then I want to make it where those look clickable because they're going to have a click event that'll trigger sort of the updating of things. And basically we're going to say nav div hover. So when you hover over these, I want the border to be 3 pixels solid green. And I want the cursor to become the pointer. Okay, so this way, like you see, like I can maybe want the border to get double the size. And then you see, like, okay, you can see which one you're selecting. But I want to make that a little bit smoother, so I'm going to put a transition on this and say, hey, when the border changes, I want it to change over 0.4 seconds. And when the, yeah, that's about it. So now when I change the border, you get a nice little better effect. Okay, I mean, right now when I click on them, they do nothing because there's no click event on them, but we're starting to kind of see the effect. Okay, cool. Now, what I'd like it is when you click on those things, that is going to render the data. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another function. We're going to call it like render the rate. And it's going to take a string that's going to say which rate, which will be part of the click event we'll create later on. Okay, which rate. But the idea is just to have these functions that kind of focus on doing one thing, because it's just easier for me to think through, okay, how, if I know which rate, if I know which thing they clicked on, how would I put that rate on the screen? Okay, that'll just be easier for me to think through. So in that case, knowing which rate's on the screen, okay, let me refresh that. Why, what does it not like? And, oh, I didn't write the word function. Okay. So assuming I know which rate, so again, which one of these strings gets passed in there, what I'd like to do is grab that specific object from the data. Okay, so there's a function we can use. So we'll say const rate equals rate, what's the map? So it's the app state dot rate. Let me think about that for a second. Actually, let's take advantage that I have this app state thing here. And what I can do is I can just make this selected rate and then just make that equal whatever they clicked on. So I don't even think well, we'll still come back to this, but I'm going to leave this empty for now. So essentially what's going to happen is that for each of these divs, the div is going to have an event listener, add event listener. That happens when you click. And what's going to happen when you click on that, okay, it is going to oh, well, it doesn't really, I actually don't have that specific object, so I could do it there. Okay, yeah, basically what it'll do is it'll render rate and then pass in the description as the rate. Okay, and that's basically, and again, the description is going to be the term, like the text that's inside of there, and that's how it gets it. So yeah, we still kind of have to do what I was going to do anyways, but that's fine. we'll say app state dot selected rate equals app state dot data dot find. So the find function is going to allow me to find a specific item in an array. So I'm going to say for each thing that's in the array, so for each rate that's in the array, what I want you to do is find me which one where the rate dot rate what's the thing I'm looking for? Security description. So security description equals which rate. Okay, because bottom line, I'm looking for that specific rate, whichever rate you passed in here, which is based on which rate I'm looping over here. Okay, so in that case, if I click on treasury bills, which rate is treasury bills? And I want to fish out the treasury bill object from the array of data. Okay, now let's just make sure that works. So let's console.log app state dot selected rate. Okay, so now if I click on total marketable securities, I should see a console. I should see a log of that object. And yep, there we go. So you see when I click on it, I have an object where it's total marketable. Okay. And then there we go. We have the data that I need. And then what I can do, so I'm going to create a string. So I'm going to say, hey, const HTML. I'm going to use, for this, because there's a lot of HTML, I'm going to use a template string. So essentially what's going to happen is we're going to have a div. Okay, and inside that div, we'll have an h1. And that h1, we're going to use interpolation to inject app state. You know, what I'm going to do here is to make my life a little bit easier. Actually, I want that console log. What I'm going to do is I am going to create a variable const just called rate that equals app state dot selected rate. Just so that way I'm not typing app state dot selected rate over and over again. That's just a lot. So it'll be just rate dot security description. Okay, and again, I just want to kind of see what those properties are. And then below that, record calendar month, record calendar year, any of these other interested. Security description, domestic securities. And we'll just say H2 is the rate. H2 and that's average interest rate amount is the property. Average interest rate amount. Average interest rate amount. Okay, so this creates some HTML. Okay, now we just want to make sure that that variable got created the way I expected it to. So I'm going to console.log HTML, make sure that that generated what I generated. So I click on foreign securities. Scroll to the bottom. Okay, there's the HTML. Yep, that's what I expected, so that works. So then what should happen is that I'm going to take that HTML, I'm going to go grab that main element, so index, we have the main, I'm going to inject that there. So I'm going to say const main equals document.query selector main. Then I want to take the main and take the inner HTML, because I want to swap out the HTML, not just the text. So I'm going to say, hey, I want to put the HTML that I have in the HTML variable in there, and then that's what that's going to do. And so now when I click on each of these, let me think about that. Why didn't that do what I think it's going to do? So this should be uncut. Inner HTML is not a function. Oh, because I did it as a function. This should be inner HTML. This equals HTML, not jQuery. Okay, so now if I do this, there we go. Foreign securities. Awesome. Okay. Nice. And now the last thing I want to do is just make it where I can refresh the rates. Okay. And what I should do though is empty out. So right here I'm adding like document query selector nav. I should empty out the nav before I do this. Okay, so in here, the reason, well, I'll show you why in a second. So let's just first cause the problem and then fix the problem. So in the footer, I'm going to want a button that just says refresh. It's easy. Okay. And cool. Just think about how I did this. App.js. And essentially what I want is that button, so button event, I want to say document.query selector. There's only one button, so I can just select it via the button. And I'm going to say, hey, add event listener. And whenever you click on this button, it's just going to run get rates again. Okay, so it's just a way for me to like, hey, if it's been an hour and I want to get the updated stats, I can click and get rates. I can then update everything. Okay, so if I click on this, it's just going to update everything. But if you notice, I just doubled everything. And if I click this again, or maybe I didn't. Let's see, let's click on uncaught error, failed to execute add event listener on event.target. Where was that? App line 60. So something went wrong here. Document.query selector button. Get rates. Oh, I forgot the first argument to make it click. Click. It's a click event. There we go. So now if I scroll down here, every time I click this, it's getting the new data, but it's extending the box. So that's a problem. Because the thing is that it's still having all the old divs, and then it's re-adding all the divs when it runs get rates again. I don't want it to do that. What I want it to do is actually restart, in a sense. So what I should do is before I loop and create all those divs, I should empty out the nav. Document.query selector nav. And then I'm going to take that inner HTML and make it equal nothing. Okay, basically just clear out the div. So that way when I click on this, it's not making it longer, it's just rebuilding it again. And then now I can click on each of these, and essentially I have a working application. Okay, now it's just a matter of making it look good. Okay, so let's do that. So style.css, let's first start off with the header and the h1. Okay, and then we're going to make that text align center. Okay, let's give that a border of 3 pixels solid brown. Okay. Nice. Now let's also fix this nav up a little bit, make it a little bit nicer. So maybe give that a border as well. Border, 2 pixels, solid. We'll start with brown, but I'll change it. Okay, brown. Okay. Like I like the scroll. I don't like the scroll bar being visible that way. Scroll. Is there a way for me to make the scroll bar disappear? Scroll bar width, let's try that. Let's make it like 1 pixel. Not really do much. Let's see here. Let's make CSS, make scroll bar invisible. can't memorize every property, but there we go, hidden. Oh, okay, so it's just that, okay. So then I just make this hidden. And then we get this effect. But it doesn't let me scroll with the... Is there another better way to do that? Ah, okay. Slide vertical. I do want the overflow for Y, overflow Y to be scroll. So let's see here. Does that give me the effect that I want? Yeah, so that way I'm only scrolling through on this side. I don't have that scroll bar on the bottom that's making it look kind of ugly. Okay. Now we're going to scroll that, fix that main. So we're going to say main. Okay, display flex, so that way we can, allocate things. Display flex. But the thing is that's really inside of a div that's inside of there. So main div. Okay, because again, that interest rate is inside of a div that I appended to the main. So I want that div to really have a width of 50% of the screen, but never lower than 300 pixels. Okay, and right now you don't really see it, so let's give it a border so you can make that more visible. 5 pixels solid green. So see, now you can see that border, but you can see that's kind of ugly. It's kind of smack dab and things, so we want to put some margin in there. So we're going to say like 20 pixels auto. Okay, so see, now that's more centered. The auto is what centers it. The 20 pixels gives you that top and bottom cushion. But you see like the text on the inside's a little too nestled up against the box, so we need some padding. So 5 pixels of padding. Okay, that's looking a lot better. Okay. And again, I can just be like, oh, okay, total non-marketable, interest-bearing debt. I can look up data pretty nicely. Okay, and then that refresh button is the last thing I want to target. So that's the footer. There's a button in the footer, so I'll target that. And we're going to want to text align center that. Oh yeah, actually technically I want to do that for the footer. That'll center the button. There we go. And then footer button, because the button is like text in the footer. It's an inline element. So let's see here. Let's give the padding on the button 10 pixels. Let's get rid of the border. Okay, so you see it's starting to look a little bit different. Okay, let's make the background color on the button green. And let's make the color of the font white. Okay, let's make the font size, we'll say 2 EMs, make it nice and big. Okay, let's round out the color, round out the border radius. That's going to round out the corner, so we'll say 10 pixels of border radius. Okay, nice. And then right now, like, the button works. I can click on it. That's great, but that's not, like, I want it to be more visibly fun. So footer, button, hover. We'll switch the color. So we're going to say background color brown. And then we're going to do a transition. Because right now if I hover over it, it's like a bit of an abrupt transition. So let's apply a transition. We'll say 0.3 seconds, and that's for the background color. So now that's a much nicer effect. And then again, I want to make sure I change the cursor to pointer to make it more visibly clickable. Okay. And right now you can't really tell that it's been refreshed. If I click on it, you just have to kind of know it's been refreshed up there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give some more feedback to make it more obviously refreshed. So what I'm going to do is at the end of get rates, after everything is said and done, actually, no, I'm not going to do it there. I'm only going to do it when you click the refresh button. So when you click the refresh button and get rates is played out, we're going to say alert rates updated. Okay, so now when I click here, although that refresh button is little claustrophobic there, so let's fix that. Oh, let's go back to CSS here. I want the button to have some margin. I don't want it to be close to anything. So we'll say 10 pixels. Okay, perfect. I click refresh. See, I get rates updated. I click on this. That brings up a rate. Then I can switch between them. Okay, and I can, again, find the exact security that I want. Okay, if I was spending more time on this, I'd probably curate a specific list of which of those items I want and put them in their own, just go in there and like do a little bit more curation. But again, now next to see how responsive this is. So I can go over here, take a look at the toggle device menu. So this is how it looks like on, well, that's too small of a screen. Let's try here. Let's try it on an iPhone Pixel 7. Okay, that looks, and again, I want to look at this like about 100% size. I think that's about fine. Okay, that's fine for a phone. How about on a tablet? So let's see here, Surface Galaxy Fold. I never bother trying to target a Galaxy Fold because it's just oddly thin. iPad Air, that's fine. Okay. So in this case, I'm not seeing anything major as far as anything that needs to be adjusted in the different sizes, but the idea is to make sure that it looks good at each size. And if there's any particular size I don't think it looks good at, I can always create a media query that targets and adjusts at that size. Okay, but with that, we did it. We got an API. Now the only thing left to do is deploy it. Okay, so to deploy it, I'm going to create a Git repository. So I'm going to do git init to create a Git repository. I'm going to do a git add dot git commit -m first commit, just to do a commit. So I have a commit. Now I need to attach this to a repo on GitHub. So I go to github.com, create a new repo. We're going to say, hey, rate tracker. Make sure it's a public repo. Click create repository. Then I'm going to grab that. Okay, and then I'm going to go over here. Make sure I add the remote. So see git remote add origin. Make sure that I put it. And then I can now do a push. Git push origin main. Push that code up. That code is now here. Awesome. Oh, I should have added a README, but not a big deal right now. I can go back and add a README now. So like just readme.md. And then theoretically here I put like documentation. And again, this pushy command is a custom command I made. So what it does, it just shortcuts that whole add, commit, push. So now I can just do all three things in one command. But again, that's not going to be on your computer because I created that as a custom. So if you want to learn how to do that, watch my videos on bash scripting. Cool. So now I can head over to something like Vercel to deploy it. And then from Vercel, I log in using my GitHub. And then from that, I can click add a new project. And then I'm going to choose which Git repository that I want to add, which is the new rate tracker one that I just created. I shouldn't have to change anything here because it's a pretty straightforward project, so it doesn't really require any special settings. So deploy. That index.html will be the main page. So it's just going to go deploy it. Shouldn't take too long. So it's deploying. Yay, it's been deployed. So now if I go to continue the dashboard, and there should be a link to the page around here in a second. There it is. here, visit the page. So I'm gonna click visit, and there it is, rate tracker.versal app. Okay, I can now click federal financing back, and I can access the different rates. Okay, so Treasury notes 6.096, Treasury bills. Where are Treasury bills at? Really, 6.059. That's a lot. Total non-marketable, federal financing back. Interesting. Those rates are high. Wow. Okay, but yeah, see there, I've created an app based on a third-party API. I've styled it and I've deployed it. Not the prettiest app in the world. Again, this was all done in 45 minutes. So, imagine what you could do with a much more time and much more time to think through what you're doing. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how this works. I'll put a link to this repo in the video description. Have a great day and enjoy.